Thank you very much. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here in Latvia. I travel a lot for what I do, but I have to say, it's been 10 years since I've been to Latvia. I arrived at 3 a.m. yesterday, so I can't tell you yet if it's changed, which is what everybody's asking me, but I will certainly tell you later. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here to talk about what is happening for destination marketing organizations in this world of change that we have right now. And I'm going to show you some of the insights from the work that I do, which is working with tourism destinations all over Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, where I see a huge range of perspectives, from national tourist boards that have to focus on global and international branding, right down to the local and smaller tourist boards that have to really focus at the grassroots level. So I understand the huge range of difficulties that you all face, the challenges, the impact of digital, and I'm going to try and translate some thinking that will maybe help you think about a new way of looking at your roles as organizations. So without any further ado, I'm going to kick off. And I'm going to start by talking about 3 paradigm shifts that we see here at the Digital Tourism Think Tank happening in travel right now. The first is that we've always been looking at this traditional notion of a visitor cycle. And most of you will be very familiar with it, whether you've looked at Google Trends, or you've studied it at university, or you've looked within your own organization. You have this very traditional cycle, which starts at unaware and ends at converted and experiencing. But of course, this is an ever-changing and ever-evolving cycle. I'm going to talk about where some changes are happening in that space in just a moment. The second is the consumer has changed dramatically. We all are completely connected all the time and active on our mobile phones. This means that our social space is happening within those devices. This means that our decisions are happening in much shorter time frames, and this means that we are always on and always connected, and therefore very, very demanding when it comes to digital services and what we can get there and then in the moment. And third, which is linked to this, is the fact that technology is now really starting to have an impact on the experience that we have in the destination. We need to understand that technology is evolving rapidly and that it will gradually start to impact how we buy services, how we experience services, and where those services come from. And in fact, you're all very aware of entrants to the travel industry that don't maybe belong here. People like Airbnb that are actually California tech startups. They are now impacting and changing who is selling and providing travel. And that's just one small example that you all know about. But this shift in the service economy is really, really significant. So I'm going to start with that visitor cycle. This is our interpretation of the visitor cycle maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I really liked this version because it was nice and simple, and we could work with organizations at a strategic level and start to look at each stage one by one and say, what are we doing at the awareness stage? What are we doing to create inspiration? How are we helping them to learn more, to discover, to plan, to book, and then to experience, and then ultimately to share and refill that cycle? So I love this strategy because it's so simple and it's so easy to walk through this. And I don't want to say that this is irrelevant, because it is still relevant. At the very foundation of what you do, you should understand how your visitors pass through that process. But unfortunately, that is also maybe too simple for the world we live in today. We started to understand the impact of social media just a few years ago and started to understand that the experience we provide in the destination has a direct impact on the word of mouth that's happening online, what people are saying about their experiences, and the need to tap into those conversations, but also amplify and empower those conversations. At a real product level, this is reviews. Hotel reviews, restaurant reviews, they have an absolutely critical and direct impact on whether somebody makes a decision, finally, whether to purchase or not, or to book or not. And it doesn't matter how good our marketing is, if ultimately the experience doesn't match it, people will not book because of that last part of the loop, where word of mouth is really important. But it's also key to actually telling new people about the experiences that we have to offer. Ambassadors, influencers, people who can reach new audiences and say, hey, this is an amazing experience, you have to try it. Unfortunately, that is something that you should all have fully understood by now and grasped. And the new thing, which is disrupting the visitor cycle, is what I can only describe as a mess or a mesh, you could say, of many, many, many touch points. Because the reality of this completely connected world is that virtually everything we touch has some kind of digital footprint. And looking at Google's most recent research, they monitored a selection of users to see how many touch points they had in that visitor cycle. And they saw that on average they were reaching more than 420 different digital touch points on that so-called path to purchase, that decision to make a purchase before going on a trip. So if you think about how that's changed, that's a dramatic explosion of different touch points. And only a few years ago, we were talking about 20 to 25 different touch points. And the challenge for you as businesses, as organizations, as DMOs, is how do we then work in so many different channels, in so many different places, and remain focused and clear and understand what our main objectives and work should be. And of course, that's not an easy question to answer. The reality is that there are a lot of choices now, and we have to be able to make choices. But we also have to be able to understand technology, the opportunities that technology provides, and how to tap in to things like marketing automation, which make those decisions on our behalf based on the criteria that we set. Now, a lot of people in big business love terms like AI and marketing automation, and it sounds so exciting and so new, and it's something we should all get to grips with. But at a very simple level, anybody who's using an email marketing tool like MailChimp offers a level of marketing automation which will help you identify what are the right touch points and automate some of that process. So we all need to understand how to be better at this and how to really optimize every little detail of what we do in digital. We can't take a broad approach. We have to take a very, very focused approach. So this is the general trend that we're seeing. All three of these are very important, but the last point, the scattered challenge that we face, is where we really, really need to work hard to understand what's happening there and understand how to work in that new connected world. Google talk a lot about marketing in moments, so I'm just going to focus on some of the points that come up in some of their research, because I think these are really good points that you should understand and think about in the work that you do. They talk about the fact that with our mobile devices, we reach and engage our customers in moments. And one of the biggest challenges, how do we engage our audience with the right story at the right time and the right moment in place? We always used to think about that inspiration part as something that would happen on television, something that would happen in print media. But now someone can be inspired simply on their way to work. So that long commercial video now might happen in just 15 seconds on a square Instagram video or a square Facebook video. So we have to completely rethink what it means to be relevant to our consumers. What is relevance? Is it relevant to provide something which really engages and inspires me on my bus journey to work? We have to understand what our consumers actually want at those different moments and times. Also, we have to be able to think about how to provide services that meet the demands of our users. So we're increasingly talking about voice and how voice is starting to become a really relevant thing. And we've seen that 3 in 4 smartphone owners turn to search for their immediate needs. And if you're not there to provide those answers, then they're going to go somewhere else. So understanding how important it is to provide direct and clear answers to our consumers' needs in that mobile space, whether that's through a social media channel, whether that's through our websites, or whether that's through a Google search, is really, really key. So we need to understand what are the problems our customers have, and how can we provide very precise and direct answers so that we don't waste their time in that mobile space where they have no tolerance for time being wasted. Also, people are looking to be better informed. This is just a general trend. Review sites have really empowered this. But as brands, we have to think about how can we help give them that informed view? How can we provide a level of subjectivity on what is actually the best thing to do. As DMOs, destination marketing organizations, we've traditionally tried to keep everybody happy, to provide all the recommendations, all the restaurants, all the hotels. And we can't do that because our consumers don't want that. They want an opinion. And we have to not shy away from providing that opinion, whether that's our opinion as experts or whether that's the opinion of ambassadors, influencers, or other people who can give that. And finally, we have to think about how to meet the needs of the customer right here, when they're in the destination, understanding that that journey has really shifted into mobile. When I speak to destination marketing organizations all around Europe, I regularly hear that they see 70 to 80% of their web traffic now on mobile. So if we're not developing a mobile-first strategy, then what are we doing? Because most of our users are actually mobile only. So let's move on. How do you get it right as a brand, as a destination, as a business, whoever you are? How do you get it right when you're communicating to consumers in this new, cluttered, and digital landscape? Well, first of all, think about content. We heard a little bit about content earlier on today. Content is absolutely central to everything you do. It's your story. It's your message. It's the experience that you convey. And it has to be truly authentic and believable. Think about developing a framework where you understand your core content pillars. Don't try and do everything. Try and narrow that down to the things which are really, really inherent to what you do. Think about partnerships. When we have 420 touch points, consumers all around the world, we heard about China just a moment ago. We cannot do all of this alone. We have to be smart. We have to work together. We have to stop working in different silos because we're never going to succeed like that. We need to work towards the bigger pie and work together to achieve that. Think about ambassadors. Ambassadors are so, so important. This is a big shift we're seeing right now, that a lot of destinations are realizing that they shouldn't be the voice anymore because for some reason consumers don't seem to trust them. I wonder why. So Helsinki, as a good example, has actually scrapped all of their traditional content for ambassador-only content. And they've identified a whole collection of so-called ambassadors which meets the interests of the target groups they're aiming at. And they make them tell the story, them create the content, them provide the tips. This is a completely different mindset from the tourist board doing all of the work themselves. Think about going live. Now, all of you are looking at Facebook. You've probably experienced Instagram stories. You've probably seen content which is relevant to you. For example, even seeing tweets about today's conference. How can you engage with people in the conversations that are relevant to them at that moment in time? And that, surprisingly, isn't something you should do impromptu. It isn't something you should do on a whim or because that seems like a good idea. Going live actually requires planning. All of you know what events are coming up. All of you know what big announcements are happening, whether it's a presidential campaign, whether it's an Olympics, whether it's a small local event. You all know what's happening in your destination over the next 12 months, and you can also plan for that. You can plan how to be relevant in those moments. You shouldn't just expect them to pass by. You need to get into those stories that are most relevant for your consumers. Developing an always-on calendar is also a really key opportunity because once you start to work week to week and identify what news stories are relevant to your destination, you can also get into those conversations and be part of those. And finally, tone of voice. Understanding what is the tone, what is the personality of your destination or of your business is so, so important. I've got great examples of hotels that have done a brilliant job. One of my favorites is probably the Hoxton in London, and I'm sure a few of you will know that. They really understand what it means to be in this small quarter of London and what it means to be the Hoxton, the hotel which so-called owns that landscape. And they live that through and through. You need to understand what it means to be your business, whether that's being Latvian or whether that's then going down to a more focused level and really live that through and through. And live that not only in the product experience, but also in how you tell that experience online, how you talk, even the humor you have when you write a short post. These are all very important details. Next, talking about targeting engagement. You know, we talk a lot about content creation recently, but I hate to tell you that without amplifying content creation, nobody's going to see it. So you can put a lot of work into great content, but you also need to make sure you engage people at a scale which is going to create some sort of impact. So targeting engagement is a really important part of this, where partners can often help you expand your reach. Think about the fact that your visitors are engaged on any channel, at any device, and anywhere. And really, really think about how you can engage with them at the right time and the right place. Also think about how you're going to create awareness, whether it's working through partners, whether that's investing in media or paid social posts. Think about how you're actually going to create awareness. PR is also still really relevant, but it's all happening in social right now. Also think about engagement. You know, volume is great, but unless you're seeing real interaction with people, it's worthless. So you need to make sure you're always focused on engagement. Engagement is better than mass reach without engagement. And finally, conversion. Make very clear what your commercial objectives are. What is the end game? How are you going to measure people on that journey? Does it take 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 2 years to build an awareness and understanding of what you have to offer? And what's the point where your customer actually makes a decision to purchase something? And do you see that? Is that something you see, or is that something your partners see? And finally, on this experiencing and sharing, think about how you can make everything shareable, whether that's the way you design a dessert in a restaurant, or whether that's putting something within the city that's so iconic that everybody has to get a photo of it. Think about how you can make sure that the environment around you has that utility factor, that people can actually engage easily, and that you make things shareable. And think about how you can also create loyalty, because loyalty is a really, really important aspect when it comes to sharing. Think about how you can be more personalized in the way you communicate with people, whether that's knowing the names of your guests, or whether that's creating something that people don't expect because you've used that demographic data that you can get online to actually personalize their experience. But ultimately, make sure it's really, really authentic, and that for your visitors, it's fulfilling. Think about your visitors' needs before everything else, and then you will succeed. So these are some big changes, and I dare to suggest that the traditional notion of a DMO, a destination marketing organization, is perhaps a little bit obsolete. The idea of a membership organization working to market its members equally in traditional media just doesn't happen anymore. And the product and experience is so, so important, whereas that's somewhere we haven't really focused in the past. So I would suggest maybe we throw away at least the M for marketing and think about it as something else. Now, I'm not the first person to suggest this. We've heard a lot of people say destination management organizations, but I'd like you to think a little bit bigger than just managing the destination. You know, Snapchat is a really new player. They've been really disruptive to the social media landscape. Facebook have run around like crazy trying to reinvent themselves and copy everything that Snapchat did just to stay relevant. And they themselves, perhaps a PR statement or perhaps real, have also redefined who they are. They no longer say they're a media channel or a social media company. They define themselves as a camera company. So if they can do that, DMOs can certainly redefine what their role is and how they create an impact. And I'd like you to think about what that X might mean if you were to replace the M for an X. The X is a mathematical symbol that can mean anything. And I'd like you to think about what is the X for me in that DXO. Think about whether it's experience, whether that's really working with data, whether that's working to understand and grasp all the intelligence that you have at your disposal, whether that's managing the destination and making sure that it's really, really working seamlessly and you're designing new experiences, or whether that's focusing on innovation, because actually there's some really amazing opportunities, but they need some bright ideas that are somewhat out of the box to make them happen. And think about how all that comes together in this new world, which is very, very scattered and highly connected and very digital. Ultimately, if you cut through all the crap or the bullshit, as we heard earlier, you've got to think about, A, putting your visitors' needs first. These are obvious things. I don't need to tell you what those are, but don't forget them. Do everything with your visitor needs first. The successful digital startups think about their users before anything else, and we need to do the same. Also then, deliver on that so-called brand promise. Whatever you're saying, make sure that it really exists. Make sure that you really work tirelessly to deliver everything that you have promised. Because if it doesn't match, it has no value whatsoever. So what does so-called Destination X really need today? First is to support the growth of the industry. 23% increase in overnights is amazing. So definitely someone's doing something right here. We need to keep doing that. We need to keep growing the industry. It's also about having growth of revenue and having the right balance of visitors and locals in the destination to make sure that that mix of visitors and locals is a really harmonious mix, that there isn't that conflict that we see in other destinations. Also thinking about how you can promote a digital-first leadership and vision so that everybody wants to adopt and embrace this new digital world, so that people aren't fearful or scared of the changes, but actually people find change exciting and they really want to embrace it. And then think about this new world that we're living in being a global world. You know, anybody growing up today sees the world as flat. I think as a so-called millennial on the very edge of that, that bracket, you know, I grew up knowing people all around the world, but you know, not all of us think about the world like this. But today's youth growing up, they don't see those geographic boundaries. They don't even see those cultural boundaries. They see a world where everybody can be everywhere and friends can be anywhere. And they don't really see those boundaries that we've traditionally been brought up with. And I think this is a really exciting idea to tap into, that actually, as the last speaker was saying, you know, forget the idea of markets and segments in that very boxed-in traditional way, because it's just not so relevant today. So if we focus on these points in just a few points. So first of all, with industry growth. Well, one of the things which I think is a really big opportunity is that the hotel sector has been absolutely dominated by the global distribution players. If you run a hotel, you'll know how important Booking.com and Expedia is to driving your business, which is great, but none of you like it because they take such huge percentages that actually you'd rather have the business direct. And that's something that's really hard to do. It's hard to get control in that space because the global players control it fully. But when we're talking about local experiences and what people do in the destination, there isn't any single dominant player in this space. And this is where there's really still a huge opportunity to play, and this is an opportunity to really win. Yesterday, we used to, if we're an experience provider, we used to host our own systems. Maybe that would even be a book of orders or a calendar, and it would be very traditional offline. Today, we've moved on to this sort of cloud-based reservation systems. But tomorrow, the way in which we deliver experiences will be autonomous. It will be through artificial intelligence. It will be services that are sort of a hybrid of digital and real-world experiences. And we need to get ready for that. And we need to think about what the impact of these changes are. We don't have all the answers. So we just need to understand what's happening and start to think about that. Also for the industry, you know, there are some key things. So how do we target this right now, right here customer? How do we provide those needs for those customers? The visitor's saying, well, I'm here, I've only got 2 hours, what can you provide me? And most attraction and tourism players can't actually provide an immediate solution or immediate service for that mobile visitor. So what does the visitor do? Nothing. They stay in a hotel bar or they take a walk. So we're not ready as an industry to provide that. And for the destination, bringing people together like you are here today is so important. You need to be the glue of the destination, the thing which pulls everyone together and focuses collaboratively and collectively on the solutions. Also thinking about what does digital-first leadership really mean? Well, in the startup sector, there's a completely different way of working to this very hierarchical way that we work in public sector. And this is something we need to start to really embrace. Some of the biggest companies also have some of the same challenges that the public sector has. And they work really hard to try and change that. So, you know, the reason we have to change that is because we need to be agile, we need to continually change, because the changes that are happening are so significant that they will disrupt us if we don't change. And this statistic on the screen right now, 50% of the world's economy will be replaced or disrupted by autonomous services. So this is really something that we need to be aware of and work on changing. And there's a few ways you can think about this, and I just don't have time to go into the detail, but a couple of things. So circular design. This is when you think about the whole economy in a circular loop where everything connects, everything makes sense, everything comes together. You can bring the idea of circular design right down to within your organization so that nothing happens outside of that circle, and you can also scale that up to the whole organization or the whole destination. Being a glass box brand, it's something that I read recently on TrendWatch, and I thought it was so relevant. How do you make sure that within your organization you're actually living and adopting the same values that you want to portray? and that you want your visitors to see. It's really, really important that we look at our values and how we adopt them and embrace them, right down, first of all, how we work with our own staff in order to make sure that we translate that through to everything we do. And also then, we don't have the answers to all the problems. So we really, really promote the idea of design thinking as a method to start to solve some of those bigger challenges, where we work together with other people through a process of testing, ideating, prototyping, and working on possible solutions. Because the reality is, these are just some of the big things that are happening right now. And people often ask me to give trends presentations, and to be honest, I get sick of talking, and I don't do it anymore, about artificial intelligence, mixed reality world, physical web, all of this stuff. There's some really exciting things happening, but you need to understand why you would engage with any of these trends first, and what value they can have to the actual work that you're trying to do. There are some really exciting things, like the video you see just there. This is an augmented reality prototype. And if you just imagine what you could do in a forest to bring all the fauna and flora to life with augmented reality, it's incredible. Or if you think about a restaurant and being able to swipe through and see the dishes on the restaurant come to life in front of you, there's so many amazing things you can do with AR. But are we ready for that? And so I don't want to get too carried away with the trends. Actually, organizations, businesses, governments that see the opportunity of working with these big ideas usually put them out to the developer community or the startup or the business community. And they create competitive challenges where they almost create events like hackathons and challenges where there's a big prize and everybody works really, really intensively on a set of challenges to come up with solutions. This is what we need to do as an industry. And this is a whole different way of thinking about procurement, thinking about how we commission and hire things in the future. We need to do it through competition because that's the world we're living in. And then finally, global and local. So these are some of the challenges that I hear regularly from businesses and organizations. We need to support local businesses. That's the first obvious thing. We need to extend the season. So most destinations have a really great summer season, but what about the rest of the year? We need to make sure that tourism benefits everybody, not just the key players that are sort of dominating that tourism economy. We need to make sure that our visitors are there as locals, not as tourists, and that our tourists are really true visitors that are welcome in the destination. And we need to make sure nobody gets left behind in digital. This is really, really important, and that's where leadership comes into play. Now, exporting tourism is a global brand that you're exporting. And there's a few things that come into play. Robert's going to talk about branding, and he's an expert, not me, on branding. But what I can tell you, and it's very clear and it's very evident from the work that I do, is that the notion that a brand is made up of multiple different sectors within society is absolutely so crucial. So think about how you can pull together all the different industries and sectors to make that brand work. So I will leave you with a few closing thoughts. We've introduced this concept of a DXO. The reality is that this DXO has to exist in a world where that digital landscape is completely scattered. We need to think about how we are relevant in that. There's a world happening right now which is known as XR, so a mixed reality world, the X being whatever, and the R being reality, where it's a convergence of the real world we physically live in and the digital world we engage in. And the lines and boundaries between them is increasingly blurred, and we don't really see exactly where one starts and one stops. So the idea of online and offline is a very old notion that doesn't really apply anymore. And the X is whatever you want to make of it, whether that's experience, data, management, innovation, marketing, development. Think about what your role and relevance is. If you can't demonstrate relevance to your industry, to your destination, and to your stakeholders, then you may as well not exist. And maybe that's a good question to ask yourself. Should we exist? Should we exist in 5 years? Do our stakeholders see that we actually create something for them? And if the answer is no, that's fine. Work on changing that, because that's what you need to do. So next I want to just touch on some things that you should think about in the planning stage. Think about how you engage with consumers. This requires serious planning. We work through templates on a really huge scale. We work through an ideation process on how we benchmark websites. We look at that mobile user experience journey. We also look at personas and how we develop interests that relate to different personas. And we look at that digital journey map and what we're doing at every single stage in that. These are all really important, and this requires you to put in the work with your colleagues and with your teammates. We also do so-called assumption mapping, where we ask difficult questions. We ask questions which challenge what we're doing and why we're doing it. And, is it desirable? Is it feasible? Is it viable? We have to ask these questions before we engage in a new technology, a new service, a new product. It's really, really important. Also thinking about always on and planning for that. Develop a 365 calendar where you see the whole year in front of you. Work week to week to see what opportunities there are to engage with those stories. Think about stories, the core stories that are inherent to your destination and how you're going to distribute those. These are really, really important. So make sure you do the homework on this, and it requires quite a lot of work. When it comes to workflow, there's some really big changes, but there's a big opportunity. We often talk about collective brainstorming, where you bring a whole industry together and you go through a process of design thinking together. Many minds are better than a few. That's obvious. So make sure you embrace the opportunity. The fact that everybody is here today is a huge opportunity to bring everyone together. Think about how you can understand what your visitors' needs are, first of all, and then redesign your product experience to meet those visitor needs. And quite often that will mean experience A working with experience B and collaborating and connecting. We don't do nearly enough work to make sure and to support different businesses to come together and say, hey, I'm doing this and my visitors need this. How can we work together? And creating combined products. That's a huge opportunity. And lastly, think about that infinite loop. How do we define the problems? How do we test whether our solutions are right? And how do we keep redefining them? The digital world we live in requires us to keep reiterating, because if we don't keep going through that iteration process, whatever we do will become irrelevant. And to close, I want to just end with a few statements that have been really strong for me in the work that I do and the different destination leaders that I've met. So I've got a few different examples here. First of all, on a development level, we've been hugely inspired by the work of wonderful Copenhagen. They take design thinking very seriously. And I recently caught up with Sina, who's the director of development at Wonderful Copenhagen. And she said to me, it's not as it used to be. It's a new era, and we need to work in a completely different way. She said, don't just reflect the reality, but write and co-create a new reality. I think these words are really, really poignant for me, because she really understands what it is to bring people together, to collaborate and work together on the big ideas.
Nick, 1
Peter
minute.
Kenty. Yeah, you've got your 1 minute, no worries. This is the last couple of slides. So Peter Kenty, he said, we play with our canvas as a city. He really sees the opportunity to use his destination as a test bed for ideas, and it really works for them. He said, think unconventional, and if a job is so important, don't make it a pitch, go into a co-creation process, because you need to work on a bigger scale. You can't just invite 4 companies to provide an offer. You need to bring different people together. And lastly, someone who I met recently in Helsinki, she was previously director of development, and she's gone up to the CEO through really amazing work that she's done. Laura Aalto, she's the CEO of Helsinki Marketing, and she says for her it's all about service. And she said, you don't know the answers, your users do, and you need to never stop developing. There's a lot to learn, but it's important that you start it. There is no end. And basically she was telling me that, they don't have the answers. They have to get in, they have to get their hands dirty, and they have to do the work. And that's really, really, really important. It's all about doing the work and working really hard with a passion on what you love and your destination, which I've seen here. So my last words are, whatever you define yourself as, and these are just some of the definitions I've heard in the last couple of years. We're a media company now. A lot of destinations are saying that. I've heard many destinations talk about being a matrix organization. And I've heard a lot saying, well, actually, we're privately funded, so we're all about advertising and seeing conversion. Whatever you define yourself as, think about what that X is for you. Think about how the DXO can shape policy, how it can drive sustainable development of the destination, and create real relevance and have an impact on what that destination really looks like and how it develops in the future. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much for having me, and it was a great pleasure to be here.